Chris said on the show that he had interrupted him 145 times. And which, by the way, speaking of Kamala and the imbalance of the interruptions, that really hurt Trump, right? And the early polls after this debate shows that I've seen have shown that people, especially women, even though Pence, did a better job than Trump did, people didn't like that he was interrupting, and Kamala was perceived as doing better. Well, after that debate, Florida, Biden was ahead 5 points. Biden's ahead 7 points now in Pennsylvania. That debate actually, in addition to some of the issues that sort of, seep through here and there of the interruptions, I think the fact of how the president acted was really, really, really troubling to a lot of people. And I think the headline after the New York Times poll was people were repelled by it. Yeah.
I want to get into the Supreme Court hearings that are going to take place next week. But before that, I want your thoughts on the president having COVID and just broadly how that is being perceived, particularly on Capitol Hill, where, it's so many layers of it, right? You have the layer of, you being a check on the executive branch as the legislative branch, but also the physical part of it that maybe I don't know if you were in meetings with administration officials, but some of your colleagues were.
You were, some of them.
Fear of actually getting the virus because the White House has become a super spreader.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, everyone wants the president to get through this, and the first lady, and his campaign manager, and the head of the Republican Party, and the press secretary. It literally spread through their entire ranks on both the campaign side, that's not usually normal here, and the official side, and that's because we're in election time. And so my first thought is, when you're the leader, you use that moment to lead, as bad as it is when something happens to you, but you use it to lead, to show the nation how you deal with adversity. And to me, he did the opposite. When he took that joyride just to wave to his fans in the hermetically sealed car and put the Secret Service at risk, when he went up the steps of the White House and defiantly took off his mask and walked in, to me, he's modeling the opposite of where you should be. As far as the Senate, Chuck and I, your senator, joined together to push for more testing in the Senate, as well as a mask mandate within the Senate. Our first moment of this, as you mentioned, Dana, is this hearing coming up. And two of our colleagues on that committee, Mike Lee and Tom Tillis, currently have the virus. Of course, we believe they shouldn't return there without a negative test. Like, that would just be outrageous. And so I would assume they're doing that. I think I read that Tillis was doing part of the questioning remotely, or the questioning remotely. I don't know about Mike, but that's got to be part of it. And then we've all had to be tested because of this, because we were in a room with them for a good hour and no one's tested positive. Of the senators. That's because we were actually following the rules of the doctor. Everyone was spread apart quite a bit. We were in the Kennedy caucus room in that meeting, and then another group of us were with Mike Lee in the Commerce Committee. That's not been noted as much earlier that day for another hour. So I was with him like 3 hours. But I think that the fact that we were apart and followed these rules made a huge difference. And the lunch that they had, that's how Ron Johnson, most people think, got sick. The Republicans still have their lunch. And so at a lunch, you take off your mask. They're doing it inside. And it's really a bad idea. And so we've been doing stuff remotely and sometimes by Zoom and things like that.
And this is, you have personal experience. I mean, your husband contracted the virus very early and was quite sick. So, you're dealing with this as a public servant and as a wife and as a family member of somebody who has, the experience. So, firsthand.
Yes. So, my husband here, since I'm home at our house, I'll show you his picture. Oh, I see Janice on, who's such a good supporter of mine on Twitter. Thank you. I just looked at the whole Zoom screen of you guys. She's always defending me. Okay, there he is. See, there's my husband right there. So he got a a really bad case of COVID early on before anyone knew really how you got it and what you should do. All we had then was practically ventilators and Advil. And so he got really sick after a week at home and ended up going into the hospital, and he was there for a week. Didn't get the test back for 6 days. Our experience was really like happened to a lot of people at the time. And then when he came home, we were so careful. We didn't know back then how long he could be contagious. And so we waited 2 weeks. He was still alone in the apartment. So he was alone for like 4 weeks or so, 5 weeks. And he was alone in the apartment and recovering. He had such bad pneumonia. So that was our experience. And then my dad got it at age 92 in the assisted living. So I had that experience where he has Alzheimer's, and he knew who we were. We're wearing masks outside, but he couldn't figure out what was going on. I remember seeing him in that room, and he looked so small, and I thought, this is the last time I'm going to see him. But he miraculously made it through. And so for me, this is so personal. Later finding out that when my husband had it, that the president, now we know from what he told Bob Woodward, said that it was deadly, but most significantly for me, said that he knew it was airborne, which at the time no one really knew. It was all about washing your hands and washing surfaces, which you should still do, of course, but that's what people thought, that's how you would get it. That's why we didn't go back I didn't go back for a month to the apartment, because you didn't know how you got it. And that just was really, really a bad thing for so many people that got it early on, to hear the president knew that. So that's why I think for everyone, that moment in the debate where Joe Biden said people have an empty chair at their kitchen table, you know, that's the story. Everyone knows someone like that, even if it didn't happen in their own family. And that's what the president can't get away from here. It is so personal to so many people. And no lies and no made up stuff or blustery comments or flinging your mask off is going to take that away when it's that personal.
Amen to that. Let's talk about what's coming up. First, before we look forward, I want you to talk for a second about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who you had the pleasure of meeting and knowing, and I know you have a pretty funny story about your daughter.
So my story is that what an icon RBG was in her 80s, right? A model for us all. And we were at one of the fashion magazines, honored like 10 women. And RBG and I were the only two that wouldn't wear the clothes, because I was like, oh my God, the designer clothes in the magazine. So we were put at the end of the story of the kind of grouping of people. That part I don't always tell, but it's quite.
I know that part. That's great.
Yeah, it's very fun. We were like, oh, we'll put them at the end. But anyway, so then they had a really nice dinner for this honor, and I brought my daughter, and she was a first year in college, and then she got this adorable picture, only adorable mostly because her glasses, which were like cool mod glasses, my daughter's matched RBG's almost identically. And so it was the two of us, Abigail and me and RBG. And later that night, Abigail says, Mom, I cannot believe I have a picture with the notorious RBG, and I put it on my Facebook page, and I hope you don't mind, but I cut you out. I cut you out, Mom, because it just made it like not as cool, So anyway, but I think that is a good launching point to think about.
Like, do you know how many people take pictures of me and post pictures of me on their Facebook pages? I am so cool.
Okay.
Don't you know who I am?
But I mean, the story to me is that she made justice cool, right? She made her job cool to people when she was in her 80s, and that's a model for everything. And what else she did? She was always just never took no. 5 bouts with cancer, doing the going into law school when no women were there, being told she shouldn't argue the equal protection cases because a man would have a better chance of winning, and then going on to show them and winning 5 out of 6 of the cases, and then getting on the Supreme Court and becoming an international icon. That was her. And so that's why as we approach this, that's kind of the spirit that I approach it with, knowing how difficult it is, knowing how sad it is that the Republicans have defied their own precedent when they very clearly said the when it's an election year, and that's what they did to Merrick Garland, the person who wins the election should pick the nominee. And they're all going against what they said just a few years ago.
And you had a viral moment saying this and more in the committee.
Ted Cruz?
After Ted Cruz, because you generally go after Ted Cruz, and as you said, that means that you should.
Well, I mean, she meant I go after him in the order.
Follow him.
Every day going after Ted Cruz.
No, yeah. She follows him in the order of speakers. Thank you for clarifying that. In the committee, and you have said that you often have your prepared remarks and you throw them out because you feel the need to respond, and you did that on this very topic.
Mm-hmm, exactly. One, because there was a precedent argument, but as I said, none of that really, and there's the whole argument actually Kamala made last night with Abraham Lincoln that I made. I said, but none of that, as big a deal as those things are, it all pales in comparison to the fact that they are doing this right in the middle of the election when people are voting. They literally nominated this nominee while people were voting. And my argument to them was, if you think people aren't going to notice and you can just take care of your own conservative business and put on a nominee who has literally criticized Justice Roberts, who is not exactly a blazing liberal, for upholding the Affordable Care Act, people are noticing. They're voting right now. And I think that's a lot of what we have to emphasize during this hearing. And so this starts on Monday. We do the opening arguments on Monday, and then on Tuesday and Wednesday are the questions. And then Thursday is kind of a panel where they bring in outside people on either side, which has never really amounted to much in my mind. But so that's what we're doing next week. And I just think we are going to make the case to the American people about what this is all about and why they have to vote, because they're the ones that put this in the middle of the election, not us, right? So don't go telling me we can't talk about the effect it's going to have on real people and the Affordable Care Act and women's rights and voting rights and everything else. So that's a case we're going to make. And
yet, because people are voting and people will have voted, in totality by, in just a few weeks, what are minefields that you're trying to avoid? Given where we are right now, like for example,
tell me if I enter them.
Yeah, well, we already know what the Republicans and what their sort of war room is telegraphing, based on her confirmation hearing for the bench, for the she's a judge now, based on her confirmation hearing for that. Questions about her Catholicism and how that plays into her. Would play into her decisions. Fair to say that's something that will be avoided on the Democratic side of the.
I don't think you've heard any of us talk about this when she was named for the highest court in the land, because it's just not relevant. But this idea that we wouldn't even ask her questions about her judicial philosophy just makes no sense. That's our job. And what her views about things like the Affordable Care Act will have a direct impact on people's lives, and they see this really clearly in an election. Otherwise, it just sounds like a bunch of ivory tower gobbledygook about this doctrine and that. But it's our job to make it very clear what the impact is of the court, and especially in the last few years, like Citizens United and some of these other things.
And I assume you guys are, when I say you guys, the Democrats on the committee.
There's a lot of guys, so.
Yeah, I know, the fair.
It's not all guys.
Less so in this committee on that side. But you are coordinating to make sure that you hit all the key topics?
Well, we'll just say we will see how we're doing when we get there. You can critique us, but I think that of course we always talk so we don't have everyone asking the same question over and over again, and you kind of talk about it loosely, but people have different interests, and what
are you most interested in?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm of course interested in the Affordable Care Act. I'm interested in the fact that they're ramming this down our throats in the middle of the pandemic, as I explained why. This is my personal interest, and this is about our colleagues and why in the world they're doing this when we haven't even had a COVID package passed, when it would be such a big deal in New York City and all over our country, including small towns in the middle of Minnesota. And then I've always been interested, of course, in voting rights, because I am the ranking on the Rules Committee, and I'm the one that actually has, I think, 13 provisions in the We the People for the People bill, and care a lot about those issues. And I'm really concerned about what this court has done on Citizens United when it comes to campaign finance, but also what's been going on around the country with voter suppression and what her views are on that.
Do you see any, I'm just going to ask you a strategy question now. Is there any way you think, assuming that that the Republicans don't lose any more than they already have, is there any procedural way that you see to stop this from being voted on before the election?
I never rule anything out, because I think the people are on our side, and it shows it poll after poll. I just saw a poll that said 74% of American people thought we should be working on a COVID package, and only 24% thought this when you put the two of them together. That's a whole lot of Republicans that are siding with us. And so I just think that you just take every question at a time, you take every day at a time, you're on the side of right. This is the wrong thing to do. And we will just keep making our case. And I think people know that the procedural options, there's not really a lot of things you can do procedurally, but there are things that you gotta hope you can, not just us, having an impression on our colleagues, and I'm talking about all of our Republican colleagues, not just the committee, which tends to be more ground in, but also how they vote and what they're going to do. And the people, the public, are going to have a big part of this too, as they hear about this nominee's views.
So you talked about voting rights. I'm sure that the list of concerns that you have are so long that you could talk about it all night. I know that early on in the pandemic, you tried to get legislation passed that would make it much more easy to vote by mail, universal voting by mail, to give more money to states and localities to make that easier. How do you think things are going based on the fact that people are voting in states from North Carolina to Pennsylvania?
Well, I think, first of all, it's incredible. People are voting in droves. You saw maybe some of the video from Ohio. Sherrod Brown was telling me about it, where, in Columbus, people are just lining up when their early voting opened in Ohio. We've never seen this many people voting by mail. That's a good thing. I lead the bill with Ron Wyden on making it easier, and a lot of the reforms we wanted to pass as part of a COVID package, which came so close because Pelosi passed a version of our bill, including over $3 billion to help states pay for it. But we were able to get some money early on for every single state, including New York State, $400 million to go out to the country. And so people have been taking advantage of that. I really don't think, we know there's going to be bad things happening in every state where people are going to try to intimidate voters, especially in states that have the witness requirement now to get in. Can you imagine? That was waived in so many states, including my own, because of the pandemic, but they just ruled in South Carolina that for the new ballots that are sent out, they will still have to go back to having a witness. So there are problems, but I guess my message would be one of hope, because so many governors and secretaries of states and legislatures have waived a bunch of these things to make it easier to vote by mail, and that includes in some Republican governor states. So many people have stood up for voting and against this idea that there's rampant fraud that the president falsely puts out every day. So you see people like Michael Steele, the former head of the Republican Party, people like Dan Coates, Donald Trump's director of intelligence coming out there and saying, no, we must have peaceful transition of power and democracy. Tom Ridge, John Kasich. I mean, it's just endless. Existing Republican governors who are standing up for vote by mail. People like Mitt Romney who stood up for vote by mail. And you could just literally name 100 more Republicans, leaders who've come out and talked about this. So I think all of that is really, really good and important. I do want to warn you, as you know from your congressional races you recently had in your city, and as Dana knows from wanting to report the results from those races, sometimes, and especially in New York, you've got an interesting way you're counting the ballots at the end there. It takes a while to count the ballots when there's a lot of vote by mails. So we've got about half our states where the ballots have to come in by election day. Some of them will start counting right when they start coming in, kind of on a rolling basis. And then some of them, the ballots don't have to be received as long as they're postmarked by the election. So I'm just hoping that Joe Biden is going to win big, which it's looking like right now. But you should expect in states around the country, it's not going to be the same as it always is. You're going to have trouble, and the media is going to have to make this very clear, predicting if they haven't even started counting the ballots. And people are going to have to be patient with that, especially in close Senate races across the country. But that's going to be a piece of this. And the last thing I'll say is for the president to claim that there's something wrong with mail-in ballots is the most hypocritical thing he can do, because picture as we're on this Zoom screen, half the screen is those voters in Milwaukee in their garbage bags and homemade masks, standing in line, most of them African-American, in the rain, just trying to cast their ballot. And we knew a lot less about COVID back then, and because safety wasn't there, 70 of them got COVID. Then on the other side, you got Donald Trump voting in the luxury of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with his mail-in ballot that he gets from Palm Beach, Florida in his slippers. I don't know if he has slippers. I made that up part, so I'll get a Pinocchio. But the point of the rest of everything I said was true. So, that is the hypocrisy here. So don't be listening to him when he says there's fraud. And the last thing I'll say about voting, everyone on this call, if you are on this call and you don't have a plan to vote, you should get off right now. Okay, just get off. Don't waste your time listening to me if you don't have a plan to vote. I had some college kids on. I asked how many of them voted, and 5 of them raised their hand. I'm like, what are you doing on this call? Make your plan to vote. And then for those of you that do, because you're, I'm sure, very steadfast citizens, you should be spending your time after you get off this call. You should be spending your time calling people that don't always vote, especially in other states, that are your friends or family or anything like that. That's what you should be doing, because you wouldn't believe the time people can spend sometimes looking at the internet when you could be spending that time calling your friends and bugging them every day. Okay, have you voted yet? Bugging them.
We're doing that on the internet.
Yeah, you can do it on the internet. I see Kimberly, who defends me online. Don't stop doing that, though. Don't stop doing that. She's a good, and Rosie is on there somewhere, some of my best Twitter people.
She was never a waste of time, Senator.
I had no idea they were going to be on here. This is so fun.
So I add 2 things to what you said. Can I add 2 things to what you said?
Yeah. Yes.
About coverage. First of all, you're totally right, and we are so cognizant of that. And just to kind of, game it out, I think you were kind of alluding to this. It is much more traditional, and even more so now because the president has been warning his own supporters about mail-in voting, even though there is no evidence of widespread fraud. It's much more likely that his voters are going to vote on election day, and that those results tend to come in sooner. So it might take a lot longer for Democratic votes to be counted, early voting, absentee voting, which is why everybody has to be patient. The other thing I want to say is you were talking about New York and, fact check. It took so long for the Carolyn Maloney primary results to come in, but it wasn't because of fraud. It's because the system wasn't ready for it, which is why I know, Senator, it was the whole reason why you wanted to give more resources to states and cities and localities that they could do that. Okay. All right. The floor is back to you. And I want to ask, because you mentioned kind of the polling that says, why is Congress working on the Supreme Court vacancy right now when people are really hurting and we need another stimulus package? And earlier this week. I don't know. The space-time continuum for me is like really off. I'm sure for you also, but I think it was this week, just maybe from the hospital or when he got home from the hospital, the president tweeted out that he was pulling out of stimulus talks, and then he reversed himself. And now I think the speaker and the Treasury Secretary are back speaking. So my question for you is this real? Do you think that there actually could be a bipartisan agreement to get some money out there before Election Day?
Well, I was actually really hopeful when he sent that tweet out, because what Pelosi did here, if you remember, the Democrats in the House passed a bill months ago, that HEROES Act, that was over $3 trillion for the whole nation. Then the Republicans in the Senate come in at about $1 trillion. Then she passes a bill for $2.2 trillion. That's what this last thing she did was, clearly trying to get a compromise going with a reduction on a number of fronts, but some, including, by the way, so important for New York, including restaurants for the first time, to have a package of that, as well as, yes, Broadway, save our stages. Yes, that is my bill. With Senator Cornyn, to help for the music venues and the theater venues, and that was also included there. And so then what happens is the White House is kind of seem uninterested, Republicans seem uninterested, and then I kept thinking, why not? Jeez, I mean, this is like, we need to have small businesses are closing hundreds every day. We need to have a bridge to what I call the day after tomorrow, when we get the vaccine out next year, whatever company comes up first, and this will be it. And so I thought it was great. I actually think they were negotiating, and then all of a sudden he just pulled back and said no package, completely irrationally. Then, as you point out, he now said, oh, okay, well, we got to look at the checks to everyone, and I think they talked about airlines or something, and this is just going to create, I think when he said he was out of it, it was like 400-point drop in the stock market.
Yes,
so
that's quite
I can't explain it, and actually none of us can explain this right now, because it makes no sense at all. Now, if he acts this squirrely all the time, funny word for him, if he keeps doing that, then I think there's still a real possibility we'll have to do something after the election, because certain parts of the economy, tech is doing great, but certain parts it's really hard. So that's why I think we're going to have to do it, knowing that my best friend in the world, who I was in kindergarten with Amy of Amy's Breads. Do you guys know that bakery? See, that's my best friend.
So you were the two Amy's?
Yes, Amy and Amy. We were in and I'll date us with a third Amy. We were in the high school gong show doing a tap dance to Once in Love with Amy, which is a really old song, but we came in second with red.
Fun. Who beat that? No one beat that.
With A-M-Y on each of your chests. I think I was M. And so anyway, but so I just know from her how difficult the whole scene is right now. And so the hope is that we can also extend PPP and do some really smart things, which is a bridge. And I am someone that cares about the debt, but even a lot of the Republican economists are saying, we've got to do something more here until we get to this moment of the vaccine. And so that's our plan. And so if we don't do it in what we call the lame duck, always a dumb term, then we'll have to do it when Joe Biden wins and is president, because I don't know how else we're going to do it. So I think, given what we're all northern winter states, that it's going to get really tough in the winter for these small restaurants to keep going. And that's why it's so important. And not to mention the testing and the moms with toddlers on their knees trying to do their laptops, and the kids going back and forth, open or don't open school. The need for broadband in our rural areas, and they can't even go to class. I was just on with some superintendents. So all of that is going to really push for some more funding.
I want to go to the chat, if that's okay with you. There's so many good
questions. See it over here. So they're doing some phone banking. Saw that night notes from Abby. Thank you.
I want to pick out one from Anita Kreitman, I think it is, who is asking about voter suppression, because I know this is up your alley, and it's a really good question. Okay. Are you overly concerned with the horrific voter suppression scenarios we are hearing, or are you confident that these can be overcome so that the actual voices of the people will shine through?
Yeah, of course I'm concerned, and it really comes in so many different ways, right? It's the disinformation. Remember, that is a form of voter suppression, right? Best example of that, 2016, Russian ruble paid, not ad, but image that was put up all over African-American websites in swing areas, places like Ohio. And it said a picture of an innocent woman. She actually called Senator Durbin's office after we used the example in judiciary. And they just used her face. And it said, why wait in line to vote for Hillary? You can text your vote at 86153 or some number. To me, that's a crime. And then it can also come, as we know this is going on, better monitoring on social media now, but still major problems. It can also come in the forms of actual laws that are passed and making it harder for people to vote and when they register. And that has, of course, been going on. There's been litigation and there's been a number of brave judges that have stepped in, including Republican appointed judges, as I said, with the pandemic here, and made changes there. Just to give you the worst example from the week, did you see where in Texas, where their Secretary of State already had to leave, by the way, for what he did? Texas, down to one drop-off box. That's where you get your mail-in ballot, but you maybe don't want to put it in the mail. You want to drop it off. One per county. Do you know how many people there are in Harris County, where Houston is? Deanna, can I stump the panel? 4.7 million people. One drop-off box. They used to have 12. So you talk about voter suppression, but they're hardy people in Texas. I bet you they're going to find a way to vote. As you know, the polls are getting closer and closer there for Biden. So, but those are all different kinds of forms of voter suppression. So I'd like to pass our bill that Ron and I have to stop this in the future, to put some minimum standards in place, still having the states run their own elections, but minimum standards.
Here's one I really like. Not just because it's from New Jersey, but because it's about women in politics. Senator, this is from Allison Fenton. Senator, I'm a member of council in a small municipality in New Jersey. Thank you for the inspiration to keep going. What advice do you have for women like me who are newly elected to office? Mm-hmm.
Well, it is to find something you love doing in your job, or if you haven't run yet, a job you want to do, and just make sure you're pursuing it and that you don't give up, because it's amazing. These things you talk about sometimes for years, and then suddenly there's that opening to actually get it done, which I hope as a nation that we are soon going to have next year. And the other advice I always give is which is a great question coming from you, is that it is not always the presidential campaign or a Senate campaign, but getting involved, running yourself, or being actually running for office. Those local races can be so important. So many of our ideas come locally, right? What did Brandeis call them? The states would be you guys tell me, what, John? My husband is a law professor. Thank you. The laboratories. Do you want to come say hi?
That was amazing.
The lab, I'm thinking Petri dishes because I'm thinking about COVID. Petri dishes. The laboratories of democracy. Here, you want to say hi to Dana and everything? There he is.
Yeah,
your photo.
Look, see, you're doing great. You look great.
Yeah, she only consults me when she wants a Brandeis quote. So.
Okay. So, but that's a pretty basic one. Okay, so, but the laboratories of democracy, and I think you have the same thing in local government. So much of the environmental movements have been stalled out on the national level with Donald Trump rolling back the Obama administration's work on greenhouse gases, but the locals have continued up the fight, including local businesses, states, the incredible work going on in California. And it's just hard to do it by yourself. And so that's where our examples come that we use to really make federal legislation. So I think pursuing something you want to do and then not taking too much grief on the internet. Like, people are going to say mean things no matter what. Half the time you realize it's not even real people doing it, but yet we have these incredible cadre of real people that have to defend you. Also it is just trying to take it in good faith, because then one day you're the hero and then the next day you're the enemy and then you're the hero again, and they all forget it in one day. It's pretty crazy. And just being true to yourself.
That's a very good one. And I will say one trick I have, when you get the mean tweets is to go on the profile and see how many followers they have, and oftentimes it's like 2. And I'm like, okay, doesn't really matter.
Every so often, I just can't do it after the presidential run. It is funny to you look and you see that they're actually a real person. These people tend to write when I write about the Vikings or the Twins, which they're not as good as some of your New York teams are this year, but they didn't get to the playoffs. So when I write something, because I really am a fan of the teams, and I especially on the Viking side, I grew up. My dad wrote all these books about the football league. This is from the early 80s, late 70s, sadly still relevant. Will the Vikings ever win the Super Bowl? Okay, they still
your dad's book? Wait, is that your dad's book?
Yeah, he wrote 23 books, yes. So anyway, so when I do tweets about sporting events, sometimes these guys will write in and they'll be like, oh, is your staff doing it? Okay, first of all, that's hilarious. Like I'm making my staff write tweets about the Vikings at like 11 on Monday night. It's no, they're not doing it. And that's what's funny too, is they think it's not you. So every so often, if I'm pretty sure it's a real person, who's just some sports fan, I've had some really funny experiences where I write back, I'm like, no, seriously, it's me. And like I show a picture or do something. And then the person actually, because they're a real person, they will actually write back, I'm so sorry, feel really bad about it. Because they're being like, what right do you have? That's what they said. What right do you have to write about sports? You're just having your staff do it. So I would not suggest that. That's just more for my own amusement. Mostly you just ignore it and you take the grown-up advice of Dana Bash.
I love it. All right, so here's a good one. Is there really a chance I guess he is the president, won't leave? And what are we prepared to do about it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't think that's going to happen. And Joe Biden has very clearly said the same thing. I guess what gives me hope, again, I mentioned all the people, the Republicans that have stood up for democracy. And I know how mad we are that they don't stand up to him when it comes to everything from COVID to the environment to immigration reform. But they have very clearly, the leaders in the Republican Party said that there must be a peaceful transition, despite his own vice president not admitting that on the debate stage last night. And then I also believe that we're going to win big just based on the polls right now. And I think that's going to help a lot. We may not know every state the first night, but I think that's going to help a lot in terms of the public pressure. And then we do have a system in place. We have dates in place. We have times in place. And we have governors who, even if they're Republican governors, have to account to their constituents. So I think that instead of just plotting out every moment of that, I think the answer is to win big and to make all those phone calls and get online like I told you, so we win big. That's what I think the best way.
So you're really relying on the systems that are in place in this, this vast imbalances, and more importantly, how looking really more deeply at how elections work at a local level, at a state level, governors have to certify, so on and so forth. You're confident that those systems will work?
I actually am, yes. And I think part of it is that he has put himself in such a disastrous place right now within his own party and with the public out there. I think that makes a big difference.
And what are you seeing in Minnesota?
Well, that's been really interesting because I've been there 7 times to our state. He's been here, and Pence about the same amount.
Including COVID potentially, by the way, but go ahead. Mm-hmm. Including with COVID, but go ahead.
So that was a thing that actually CNN brought out, I guess, because we were involved in getting them. Someone asked us, our office, about talking to the governor's office, and because Trump said they were all done with the contact tracing, and that's not true in Minnesota because he came to Minnesota the night after the debate, and we still don't know when he had a negative test. We have no idea. And presumably he was, and Hope Hicks was on the plane, and there were congressmen on the plane. Half our delegation is quarantined, whole nother story. But it was from Minnesota. They were on the plane both ways. And so I just think that from Minnesota, from the COVID perspective, we have been hanging in there under the leadership of Governor Walz. We're surrounded by states that are having huge spikes, in part because of the lack of rules in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa. Wisconsin's having a huge spike. So we are having some increases, but we really tried to put in place some safety things. But when it comes to the election in Minnesota, to get back to that, Trump really targeted our state. He personally said to me twice in the last few years, pre-pandemic, he said to me, if I would have gone back there again, I would have won. He's talking about 2016. And he has said this publicly many times. But in fact, the more times he comes back, the better Joe Biden does. And I'm not kidding. You can see it. We just keep going. And Biden's come out here. I was with him up in Duluth. And Jill has come here twice. But they're not overreacting to what Trump is doing because it doesn't really make much sense. And I kind of figure every time he comes back to Minnesota, he's not in Florida or Arizona or some other place. And the other thing he did, of course, was try to play off the divide after the murder of George Floyd in our state. And that's around the time, about a month or so later, where he started trying to say you're not going to be safe with Joe Biden. And I think that theme, if you've noticed, he doesn't use as much, has totally backfired because literally people in my state started going, okay, well, first of all this divide isn't good. And the rise that we're seeing nationally, what just happened in Michigan, oh my, with, 13 people charged with trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, and the attorney general. So they don't know this is going on, but in their mind they're thinking, things don't feel safer. Then they think the fires on the West Coast and all this, is we really safer? No, we're not. And then, of course, the pandemic. No, we are not safer with Donald Trump. So I think that was about the worst argument he could have used. And it's totally backfired in states like mine, especially with suburban voters now going into the rural areas. And they were really, our state likes civic dialogue. I know we elected Jesse Ventura, but we like debates. We like civic dialogue, and that debate, according to, I know people that have done polling in our state in congressional races, it really bottomed out Trump.
I mean, I've talked to some of your colleagues in red states who say that it bottomed out Trump. So I can imagine what it's like in a bluish, swingy-ish state like yours. We're getting close to the end, but I just want to ask, because I know you and you have genuine relationships across the aisle. And, you're a Democrat who believes Republicans are people too. And you've been able to pass bipartisan legislation on a number of issues. And so given that, and given how toxic Washington is, and, for people on this, on the Zoom call in New York and all over the country, and maybe even the world watching, should they have hope that things can get better and will get better?
Yes.
Two scenarios. If Donald Trump is reelected, is it possible? And if Joe Biden is elected, how quickly would that happen?
Okay, so I'm not going to go into that first hypothetical that Trump can win. Just all signs are that he won't. I think we would be in a much stronger place if your Senator Chuck Schumer, and by the way, your other Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is a friend and great senator as well. But if Chuck was leader, he knows how to get things done. You know that. He knows how to make deals. And he knows how to work across the aisle. It doesn't mean he's not a strong advocate or compromise on his principles. I just think that'll make a difference, as opposed to Mitch, who's just looking at gridlock all the time when he's in charge, even though Mitch actually does know how to get things done. That's the part that hurts so much. He knows how to make deals. And just the eagerness and the thirst for action is so big across this nation right now. That's also what gives me hope. And then as far as our Republican colleagues, I think that there are a number of them that are just scared of Donald Trump. And let me, to make the case for them, their constituents in some of the reddest states are still strongly behind him in terms of numbers. I think that is eroding as we speak. But that has held them back, whether you think it's fair or not, from making deals. My best example of that is someone I do respect, Mike Rounds over in South Dakota. He helped lead a group of us that was working on the Dreamers. And it was Tim Kaine and I were were probably some of the more left of middle in our party people that were in the group. But there was a whole bunch of people. I remember, I think Heidi was in it, and we came up with an agreement on Dreamers that would have been so good. It also included the people that are here in the temporary status. And in my case in Minnesota, we have the biggest number of Liberians in the country. They've been there for 25 years. They're like grandmas, okay? But they were always in this temporary status. So we were going to take care of all that in the agreement. We had a bunch of Republicans in the room, but also signed up on a bill. They introduced a bill. It was ready to go. And they got gut punched, these Republican senators, by their own president. And 2 days later, he says, no, they don't want it. And they get gut punched and the whole thing falls apart. I use that example because many times Republicans have wanted to get done immigration reform. Early days, they want to do climate change. They're not right now. They clearly want to do something on the pandemic, some of them. And so I just think the ugliness of this administration and Donald Trump out of there. And if you combine that with us taking back the Senate, it could be just a recipe of finally moving forward on so many things.
Okay, last question, and this is a good one to end on. And that is from Karen. With all the madness going on, what keeps you so hopeful? You are a very optimistic soul.
Well, the fact that my husband's making dinner right now. Maybe. Are you? Not really. Okay, but he claims
He's too busy looking at Brandeis quotes for you.
yeah, he's going to get a whole bunch of them maybe for the hearing. But no, I do think your family grounds you during these times. I know it grounds you, Dana, with your adorable son, who, by the way, loves Hamilton, you guys, just so you know. I think that's part of it. And then I just think when I was growing up, and I wrote this book called The Senator Next Door, and I went through my life growing up. My dad struggled with alcoholism, and due to, his faith, but also the treatment he got, he came through the other side. And because of that, it's made it really hard for me to just judge people in extremes. Like, I think you can screw up sometimes in your life, and you can still love someone. And so I don't mean to make that a metaphor for the Republican Party, but you can find that kind of common ground and move ahead. And that's what gives me hope. Just because I've seen people do some brave things over time. Sometimes it's not even public stuff, but I have. And I think just the fact that people in this extraordinary circumstances, especially in your city, those moments that you started with the banging of the pans when the workers would come back from the hospitals, and all those people at the beginning of this thing and going forward to now. And in some ways now, when people are getting less ordinary things, it's even harder, I think. But the fact that people have hung in there through the worst of times, that gives me hope too. And that they're voting and they're finding ways to express themselves and finding ways to still stay close to people, like doing things like this. That's what gives me hope.
That's a great place to end. Senator, thank you so much. Have a great dinner. Thank you to the 92nd Street Y, this iconic place in New York City. Hopefully at some point soon we will all be able to get back in person. And
thank you, Sue, too. Thank you, Sue. There you are.
Thank you, Sue.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Okay.
See you at the hearings on Monday.
Oh, yeah. I'll see you there.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
See you, everybody.